There seems to be a mistake, ma'am. We need you to move to accommodate our VIP passenger, Jason. The flight attendant said, his tone condescending despite the polite words. This seat is reserved for our platinum members only. You don't belong here. Behind him stood Kevin Blackwell, an elegantly dressed white man, tapping his designer watch impatiently. His eyes darted between Mariah, the black woman in seat 2A, which he clearly considered his rightful place. I always sit there. It's practically my seat, he muttered, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Mariah looked up, confusion crossing her face. She had done everything right, booked early, paid in full, arrived on time. She was a platinum member, yet somehow her presence in the seat was being framed as a problem that needed solving. Mariah calmly reached for her wallet and produced her platinum member card. I am a platinum member, she replied evenly, and this is my assigned seat. The flight attendant's smile tightened. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly replaced by determination. I understand, ma'am, but this particular seat is typically reserved for our regular platinum members who fly with us frequently, he said, pointing to Kevin Blackwell. The implication was clear. Regardless of her status, Mariah didn't belong in that seat. Passengers began to notice. Phones slowly emerged. The whispers started. What the flight crew didn't know was that this simple act of discrimination would change everything in the next few hours, not just for them, but for the entire airline, because the person they underestimated held their fate in her hands. This story is the perfect example of when karma arrives with a first-class ticket of its own. Mariah Johnson wasn't just any passenger. At 38, she was the founder and CEO of Equinox Technologies, a $3.5 billion AI company specializing in ethical algorithms and bias detection systems. Her software helped companies identify and eliminate discrimination in their automated system Saronic, considering what was about to unfold. Born in Detroit to a single mother who worked 3 jobs, Mariah had taught herself coding at 12 using computers at the public library. While other kids played outside, Mariah built simple programs that eventually evolved into complex algorithms. Her mother had sacrificed everything to put her through college, working night shifts at the hospital while battling lupus. Never let anyone tell you where you belong, her mother had told her the day Mariah left for MIT on a full scholarship. Those words became her North Star. The day her mother died during Mariah's sophomore year, she made a promise at the funeral to build technology that would make the world more fair. That promise fueled 15 years of relentless work, starting Equinox in her tiny apartment while working as an adjunct professor to pay rent. That day at LaGuardia Airport, security cameras captured Mariah helping an elderly man with his heavy luggage, patiently guiding him to his gate. She held doors for strangers, thanked every service worker by name, and left generous tips at the airport cafe. Not because she was being watched, but because that's who Mariah Johnson was, humble despite her success, kind despite her power. Now she was traveling to deliver the keynote address at the Global Ethics in Technology Summit in San Francisco. As Mariah settled into her first-class seat on Celestial Airways, a seat she had specifically chosen for its proximity to the window so she could review her presentation while watching the clouds, she reflected on how far she'd come. Celestial Airways was the epitome of luxury air travel. First-class tickets cost more than some people's monthly rent. Their platinum members enjoyed heated towels, champagne service, and seats that reclined into full beds. But behind this polished exterior, Celestial was desperately trying to modernize. Their booking systems were outdated, their customer service rankings had slipped, and they were eagerly pursuing a partnership with a major tech company to revolutionize their operations. What the Celestial crew didn't realize was that sitting in seat 2A was the CEO of the very company they hoped would save them. Flight attendant Thomas Miller had been with Celestial for 10 years. He prided himself on knowing the preferences of regular first-class passengers. He always made sure Kevin Blackwell got his preferred seat 2A, the one currently occupied by Mariah. Thomas had a son in private school and knew that Kevin's generous tips helped make tuition payments each month. "Ma'am, we have a platinum member who always sits in this particular seat," Thomas said, leaning down toward Mariah. "Would you mind moving to another first-class seat?" His tone was polite but carried an undercurrent of expectation. Mariah looked up from her tablet, momentarily confused. She reached for her boarding pass and showed it to Thomas. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat," she explained calmly. "I'm also a platinum member." Kevin Blackwell stood in the aisle, making no attempt to hide his annoyance. Other passengers could clearly hear him when he said, "I always sit there on this route. It's practically my seat." The situation was quickly becoming uncomfortable. Several passengers were now watching the interaction unfold. Thomas shifted his weight from one foot to another, glancing nervously between Mariah and Kevin. "Ma'am, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in another section," Thomas suggested, his implication clear. He wasn't offering her another first-class seat. Mariah remained composed. "No, thank you," she replied firmly. "I've selected this seat specifically for the window view, as I need to prepare for my keynote speech during the flight." Thomas's smile tightened. He nodded curtly and walked toward the front of the cabin, where he occasionally glanced back at Mariah. A passenger across the aisle secretly recorded as Kevin stepped forward, seemingly to put his bag in an overhead compartment. As he did, he slipped a folded stack of notes into Thomas's pocket with practiced discretion. "I appreciate your help with this situation," Kevin whispered, just loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Some people just don't understand how things work." Thomas's face flushed as he accepted the money. In that moment, a simple seating dispute transformed into something far more sinister. A bribe to discriminate against a passenger based on appearance. Sophia, the cabin supervisor, approached Mariah's seat with the confident stride of someone accustomed to having her authority unquestioned. Her posture was rigid, her expression fixed in what she likely believed was professionalism. "Ma'am, we need you to move to accommodate our VIP passenger," Sophia announced, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request, but a command. Mariah looked up from her tablet, her expression calm, but her eyes revealing a weary familiarity with such encounters. "I've shown my boarding pass and platinum status," Mariah replied evenly. "This is my assigned seat." Sophia's face tightened. A muscle twitched near her jaw as she leaned in slightly. Her voice took on a condescending tone that made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Perhaps you're unfamiliar with how things work on this airline," Sophia said, emphasizing each word as if speaking to a child. "We accommodate loyal customers who have specific preferences." By now, the confrontation had captured the attention of nearly everyone in the first-class cabin. A businessman across the aisle discreetly angled his phone toward the interaction, recording the escalating situation. Kevin remained standing in the aisle, his designer briefcase clutched against his chest, his impatience becoming increasingly theatrical. He checked his watch dramatically before letting out an exaggerated sigh that echoed through the cabin. "I have an important merger meeting right after landing," he announced to no one in particular. "I need my usual seat. This is beyond ridiculous." The other passengers' expressions told the real story. An older woman whispered to her husband, "She doesn't even look like she belongs in first class anyway." Sophia, emboldened by Kevin's performance, leaned down closer to Mariah. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, but in the tense quiet of the cabin, her words were still audible to those nearby. "Ma'am, we can do this the easy way, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." The threat hung in the air. A moment stretched into seconds as passengers held their breath, waiting for Mariah's response. Many people might have yielded at this point. The pressure of public confrontation, the implicit threat, the desire to avoid further escalation. But Mariah Johnson wasn't most people. Her calm never wavered as she looked Sophia directly in the eyes. "I'm not moving," she stated firmly. "This is my seat." 4 simple words delivered without anger or aggression, but with absolute certainty. Sophia's face flushed red. This wasn't going according to plan. She straightened up, adjusted her uniform scarf, and without another word, walked briskly toward the front of the cabin. She picked up the service phone, her back to the passengers, but her agitated gestures were visible to all. 5 minutes passed before the cockpit door opened. Captain Elena Vasquez emerged, her weathered face set in a professional mask as she followed Sophia down the aisle. Thomas trailed behind them, visibly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. Captain Vasquez stopped beside Mariah's seat, towering above the seated passenger. Her voice carried the practiced authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Ma'am, I understand there's a situation." The captain began, her tone measured but firm. "My crew has the authority to assign seats as needed for the comfort and convenience of all passengers." Mariah looked up at the 3 airline employees now standing over her. The power dynamic wasn't subtle. 3 standing, 1 seated. Yet Mariah's composure never wavered. "Captain, with all respect," Mariah replied, her voice steady. "I have a confirmed seat assignment and platinum status. I've selected this specific seat for the window view I need to prepare during the flight. There's no policy that requires me to give up my assigned seat to another passenger who simply prefers it." Thomas's lips curled into what could only be described as a smirk, the expression of someone who believed they held all the cards. "Ma'am, if you continue to be uncooperative," Thomas interjected, "we'll have no choice but to remove you from the flight." The threat landed like a physical blow. Mariah's eyebrows raised slightly, the first sign of genuine surprise she'd shown throughout the confrontation. "Are you threatening to remove me because I won't give up the seat I paid for?" she asked, her voice reflecting disbelief. Before the captain could respond, Kevin's voice cut through the tension. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed. "I have a meeting that will determine the future of my company." "You're being removed for creating a disturbance," the captain replied to Mariah, the words sounding hollow even as she spoke them. A murmur ran through the cabin. An elderly gentleman in the second row shook his head in disgust, while a young woman near the back of first class wiped tears from her eyes. Mariah began gathering her belongings. She closed her tablet case, tucked her presentation notes into her briefcase, and stood slowly. Kevin, who had been watching the entire scene unfold, made no attempt to hide his satisfaction. A smug smile played at the corners of his mouth as he watched Mariah being escorted from her seat. This seat now, he believed. "Finally," came Kevin's voice, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people clearly don't know their place." "But she didn't do anything wrong," called another passenger. "I'm recording all of this," announced a third. But despite the comments, Mariah was being removed. She walked with her head held high, her back straight, her eyes forward, the posture of a woman who had faced injustice before and knew how to maintain her dignity in its face. As she passed by the row where Sophia stood supervising the removal, something happened that would later become a key piece of evidence. Kevin, thinking himself unobserved, slipped another folded bill into Sophia's pocket. "Thanks for handling that situation," he whispered, his voice just loud enough to be captured by several passengers' recording phones. "First class should have standards." The implication of his words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. As Mariah stepped off the plane, escorted by airport security, she pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen as she composed a text message to her COO, Elise. "I was just removed from a Celestial Airways flight. They picked the wrong black woman to humiliate today." While most people would be flustered, embarrassed, or enraged after such an experience, Mariah exhibited the controlled composure of someone who had navigated these waters before. "Daniel, it's Mariah. I need you to assemble the legal team immediately." She spoke into her phone, her voice low but firm. "I've just been removed from a Celestial flight in what appears to be a textbook case of discriminatory treatment." The security officers who had escorted her off the plane lingered nearby, their initial certainty dissolving into uncomfortable realization. One officer was reviewing the incident report on his tablet, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he scrolled through the details. "Ma'am," the officer finally said, approaching Mariah hesitantly, "I believe there may have been a misunderstanding. The report indicates you were being disruptive, but the witness statements don't support that." Mariah lowered her phone for a moment, her gaze steady as she addressed the officer. "There was indeed a misunderstanding," she replied, "but not on my part. I was sitting in my assigned seat with a valid boarding pass when I was asked to move to accommodate another passenger's preference. I declined. I was forcibly removed." The officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner who was already backing away from the situation. They both knew they had been used to enforce something that had nothing to do with security or safety protocols. "We apologize for the inconvenience, ma'am," the officer offered weakly before following his partner in a hasty retreat. Mariah immediately returned to documenting the incident, recording a detailed voice memo recounting every interaction, every word spoken, every nuance of body language she had observed. As she spoke into her phone, a young man approached hesitantly. He was clutching his carry-on bag in one hand and his phone in the other. Mariah recognized him immediately. He had been seated across the aisle from her in first class. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice tinged with indignation on her behalf. "I followed you off the plane because I couldn't just sit there and be part of what was happening. I recorded everything from the moment that flight attendant first approached you until they forced you off the plane." He held up his phone, showing Mariah the video clear, unobstructed footage that captured not only her removal, but also the damning moment when Kevin slipped money to both Thomas and Sophia. "This was clearly discrimination," the young man continued, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. "You should have this." Mariah's expression softened for the first time since the ordeal began. "Thank you," she said with genuine gratitude. "This may be very helpful." They exchanged contact information, the young man promising to send her the full unedited video immediately and to testify if needed. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his video would soon be seen by millions. Meanwhile, back on the aircraft, a very different scene was unfolding. Kevin Blackwell had settled comfortably into Mariah's seat, his smug satisfaction barely concealed as Thomas delivered a complimentary glass of scotch. "I'm so sorry for the disruption, Mr. Blackwell," Thomas offered deferentially. "We want to ensure the rest of your flight is perfect." In the galley, out of passengers' sight, Thomas and Sophia exchanged knowing looks as Thomas discreetly counted the folded bills Kevin had slipped him, 300. The price they had accepted to humiliate a woman whose only offense was occupying a seat she had rightfully purchased. "Nice bonus today," Thomas murmured, tucking the money into his wallet. Some passengers understand how to show proper appreciation. Neither of them realized that this bonus would soon cost them far more than they could possibly imagine. On the top floor of the sleek, glass-walled headquarters of Celestial Airways in Chicago, CEO Richard Harrington was reviewing quarterly projections when his phone rang with an internal call from the Public Relations Department. "Sir, we may have a serious situation developing." The PR director's voice carried an unmistakable edge of panic. A video is going viral showing one of our passengers being removed from a flight this morning. Harrington sighed, initially dismissive. "Passengers get removed for disruptive behavior every day, Janet. Handle it with the usual statement." "Sir, this is different," the PR director insisted. "The passenger was not disruptive. She was a black woman in first class who refused to give up her assigned seat to a white man. The video shows our staff accepting cash from the man before and after her removal." The blood drained from Harrington's face as he processed the implications. "Send me the video now." As Harrington watched the footage on his monitor, his expression shifted from concern to horror. The clear discrimination, the money changing hands, the dignified composure of the woman being removed was a PR catastrophe unfolding in real time. "Who is she?" Harrington demanded. "Have we identified the passenger?" There was a moment of hesitation before the PR director responded. "Yes, sir. According to the manifest, her name is Mariah Johnson." The silence that followed was deafening. "Did you say Mariah Johnson?" Harrington finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. Does that name mean something to you?" Harrington collapsed back into his chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. Mariah Johnson is the founder and CEO of Equinox Technologies, the same company we've been courting for a $75 million partnership to modernize our entire digital infrastructure. "Oh my God," the PR director whispered. "It gets worse." Harrington continued, his voice hollow. "She's also been quietly buying our stock for the past 3 years. The last SEC filing showed she controls nearly 18% of our shares." Miles away in a private airport lounge, Mariah sat at the center of a rapidly assembling team. Her COO, Daniel Washington, had arrived within 30 minutes of her text, bringing with him their chief legal counsel and head of corporate communications. Laptops were open, phones were buzzing, and the atmosphere crackled with focused energy. "The video has already reached 3 million views," the communications director reported, turning her screen to show the rapidly climbing numbers. "Major news outlets are picking it up now." Daniel and Mariah exchanged a significant look, one that spoke of years of shared experiences and mutual understanding. "They don't know that we were already evaluating their company culture for the partnership," Daniel said, his tone reflecting the bitter irony of the situation. "I guess they just gave us their authentic selves without realizing who was watching." Mariah nodded, her expression thoughtful rather than vengeful. "This isn't just about me," she said quietly. "This happens to people without my resources every day. The difference is, I can actually do something about it." In the Celestial headquarters, the social media team was in full crisis mode. Screens displayed the rapidly spiraling situation. Celestial discrimination was trending nationally. The video view count had passed 8 million, and celebrities were beginning to amplify the story to their millions of followers. Harrington was now surrounded by his executive team, their faces grim as they assessed the damage. "Sir," his assistant interrupted, phone in hand, "I have Mariah Johnson's office on the line. She's requesting to speak with you directly." The room fell silent. Harrington took a deep breath before accepting the call on speakerphone. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his voice strained with forced cordiality, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the inexcusable incident that occurred this morning. Mr. Harrington, Mariah's voice came through the speaker, calm and measured. I appreciate your willingness to speak with me directly. As you may be aware, my company owns approximately 18% of Celestial Airways, a significant stake that gives me considerable influence over company decisions. The executives exchanged panicked glances, the full magnitude of the situation finally dawning on them. I want to call an emergency board meeting immediately, Mariah continued, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. The events of today have raised serious concerns about Celestial's corporate culture and commitment to the ethical treatment of all passengers. An emergency board meeting had been convened with unprecedented urgency. Board members had dropped everything to attend, some still in golf attire, others having clearly rushed from family events. The tension in the room was suffocating as they waited for the arrival of the woman who now held their fate in her hands. When Mariah Johnson finally entered, the effect was immediate and electric. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. Every head turned. Despite everything she had experienced that day, Mariah carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. She wore the same cream-colored pantsuit she'd been wearing when removed from the plane, a subtle but powerful reminder of the day's events. Behind her walked her executive team, Daniel Washington, their legal counsel, and two others whose presence would later prove crucial to the transformation that was about to begin. As Mariah took her seat, Harrington used a remote to dim the lights and activate the massive screen at the front of the room. The video began to play, crystal clear and devastating in its implications. Every moment was captured. The initial confrontation, Thomas's condescension, the captain's weak justifications, and most damning of all, the money changing hands before and after Mariah's removal. When the footage ended, the room remained silent for a full 30 seconds. Several board members couldn't maintain eye contact with Mariah. Harrington cleared his throat, his face ashen as he turned to address Mariah directly. Ms. Johnson, we want to express our deepest apologies for the inexcusable treatment you experienced today. I'm not interested in apologies, Mariah interrupted, her voice calm but resolute. The bluntness of her response sent a visible ripple through the room. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, suddenly aware that standard corporate damage control would not suffice. As your largest individual shareholder, Mariah continued, I have two demands and one decision. First, every staff member involved is terminated immediately. Second, Celestial will implement a comprehensive anti-bias training program for every employee, from baggage handlers to pilots. My decision is that I am putting our partnership negotiations on hold indefinitely. Harrington glanced nervously at the board members before responding. Ms. Johnson, while we understand your frustration, perhaps we could consider suspensions instead. Some of these employees have been with the company for many years and are union agreements. This isn't negotiable, Mariah stated, placing her hands flat on the table. It's accountability, or I'll begin divesting my shares tomorrow morning when the market opens. The implications hung heavy in the air. 18% of their stock suddenly dumped on the market would be catastrophic. The loss of the $75 million modernization contract would leave them years behind their competitors. As if on cue, the boardroom doors burst open. A young financial analyst rushed in, clearly having run from another floor. He thrust a tablet toward Harrington, forgetting all protocols of boardroom etiquette in his urgency. Sir, news of the incident is already affecting our stock price, he announced breathlessly. We're down 15% and falling. Market analysts are predicting a possible 35% drop by closing if we don't take decisive action. Harrington looked from the tablet to Mariah and back again. the reality of his situation becoming painfully clear. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about the very survival of the airline. "The board will need to discuss this privately," one of the directors suggested, looking nervously at Mariah. "Of course," she replied, standing. "I'll give you 30 minutes to make your decision. But understand this, what happened today wasn't an isolated incident. It was the result of a culture that tolerates discrimination, and cultures don't change without consequences." As Mariah and her team left the room, the board erupted into panicked discussion. Some argued for fighting back, others for full capitulation. But the numbers on the financial analyst's tablet told the real story. They couldn't afford to lose Mariah Johnson's support. Exactly 30 minutes later, Mariah returned to a subdued boardroom. Harrington stood as she entered, his earlier arrogance replaced by resignation. "The board has agreed to your terms," he announced. "The employees involved will be terminated immediately, and will implement the anti-bias training program as you've suggested." Mariah nodded, her expression revealing nothing. "I'll have my team send over the details of the training program. It's not just about firing a few people. It's about changing the entire culture." "And the partnership?" Harrington asked hesitantly. "That depends on what I see in the next 6 months," Mariah replied. "Actions, not words, Mr. Harrington." 3 floors below the boardroom, in a sterile conference room devoid of luxury, Thomas, Sophia, and Captain Vasquez sat in uncomfortable silence. They had been summoned without explanation, though the growing whispers throughout the company had given them reason for concern. The HR director entered promptly at 4:30 p.m., accompanied by the company's legal counsel and 2 security officers who positioned themselves discreetly by the door. The presence of security wasn't standard procedure for performance reviews or even disciplinary meetings. It signaled something far more serious. "I'll be direct," the HR director began, placing 3 identical folders on the table. "Your employment with Celestial Airways is terminated effective immediately." The statement landed like a physical blow. Thomas's face contorted with indignation. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Captain Vasquez simply closed her eyes, her weathered face suddenly looking decades older. "This is outrageous." Thomas was the first to recover, his voice rising with each word. "We were just following procedure. That passenger was being difficult and disrupting the boarding process." The HR director's expression remained impassive as she opened her laptop and turned it toward them. The now viral video began to play, capturing Thomas's condescension, Sophia's evident discomfort, and the captain's abdication of responsibility clear for all to see. But it was what happened next that drained the color from Thomas's face. The footage clearly showed Kevin slipping money into his pocket, his words about maintaining standards audible despite his attempt to speak quietly. Was accepting money from a passenger to discriminate against another passenger procedure? The HR director asked, her tone making it clear there was no acceptable answer. Sophia broke down, tears streaming down her face. "We made a terrible mistake," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew it was wrong, even as it was happening, but I didn't stop it." Captain Vasquez, a woman who had navigated through literal storms during her career, seemed unable to weather this one. "I was just trusting my crew's assessment," she offered weakly. "I didn't personally witness the initial confrontation." "You all failed in your responsibility today," the HR director stated firmly, "not just to the company, but to basic human decency. The passenger you removed was Mariah Johnson, CEO of Equinox Technologies and our largest individual shareholder." The revelation hit them like a second blow. Sophia's crying intensified, and Thomas's face, previously flushed with anger, now drained completely of color. You will be escorted to collect your personal belongings and then to the exit. The HR director continued. Your final pay will include 2 weeks severance, which is more than generous given the circumstances. As they were led from the room, the 3 former employees experienced what Mariah had felt earlier that day, the humiliation of being escorted out while others watched. The symmetry was both perfect and devastating. In the weeks that followed the incident, Celestial Airways underwent the most comprehensive transformation in its 35-year history. Conference rooms across the country were converted into training centers. Flight schedules were modified to ensure every employee, from baggage handlers to the CEO himself, participated in the mandatory program. The training wasn't the standard corporate checkbox exercise that employees had grown accustomed to ignoring. It was immersive, challenging, and at times uncomfortable. Employees were confronted with their own biases through sophisticated simulation exercises developed by Equinox's team of behavioral psychologists and AI specialists. Mariah made a point of personally addressing many of these sessions, standing before rooms filled with skeptical, sometimes defensive employees. "This is your opportunity to be part of the solution," she told them, her voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "What happened to me happens to people without my resources or platform every day. Today, we begin changing that." For some, her presence was transformative, putting a human face to what management might otherwise have dismissed as a PR crisis. For others, her willingness to engage despite her treatment demonstrated a commitment to genuine change rather than retribution. Outside Celestial's corporate bubble, consequences continued to unfold. Thomas, Sophia, and Captain Vasquez discovered that in the digital age, accountability follows you everywhere. Their names and faces had become synonymous with discrimination in an industry where reputation is currency. Thomas sat in his apartment surrounded by rejection emails from other airlines. "Previous experience noted, but we've decided to pursue other candidates at this time." The polite corporate language couldn't mask the reality. No one wanted to hire the man from that viral video. Sophia faced similar rejections, each one deepening her understanding of how a single decision could alter the trajectory of a career built over 10 years. During one interview that initially seemed promising, the hiring manager's expression changed the moment recognition dawned. "You're the flight attendant from that discrimination incident, aren't you?" The interview ended shortly after. Captain Vasquez, with 25 years of flying experience, found herself unable to secure even entry-level positions within the industry. Her distinguished career had been reduced to those few minutes of poor judgment when she had failed to stand up for what was right. Kevin Blackwell wasn't spared either. Celestial had implemented a lifetime ban, but the consequences extended far beyond his preferred airline. He sat in his living room, watching news coverage of the incident, his name and actions discussed by national commentators. His company had placed him on administrative leave pending an investigation into his conduct. Friends had distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the man now branded as Airline Kevin across social media platforms. For perhaps the first time, he was forced to confront the real impact of his entitlement. Meanwhile, Celestial was implementing sweeping policy changes, new guidelines that established zero tolerance for discrimination, enhanced protocols for handling seating disputes, and protection for employees who reported misconduct. The employee handbook was rewritten to explicitly state that accepting gifts or payments from passengers in exchange for preferential treatment was grounds for immediate termination. Passengers began noticing differences almost immediately. Brief interviews captured at gates and baggage claims revealed a shifting perception. "The flight attendants seem more attentive to everyone now," noted one frequent flyer. Before, it always felt like there was an invisible hierarchy based on how you looked or what you were wearing. I actually had a problem with my seat assignment. Shared another passenger, but the way they handled it was completely professional. They found a solution that worked for everyone without making anyone feel less valued. 6 months after the incident that nearly destroyed Celestial Airways, the company was not just surviving, it was thriving. Passenger numbers had not only recovered but increased by 15%. Employee satisfaction scores were at an all-time high. The toxic culture that had festered beneath the surface for years had been exposed to the light and was finally healing. The most surprising development came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Mariah Johnson announced a new initiative through her foundation, the Second Chance Program. Designed specifically for individuals who had lost their jobs due to bias incidents. The program offered comprehensive rehabilitation training and a path back to employment. Accountability doesn't mean permanent punishment, Mariah explained at the press conference launching the program. It means earning your way back. We cannot build a more just society if we don't create pathways for those who have acknowledged their mistakes and done the work to change. Among the first participants in the program were Thomas, Sophia, and Captain Vasquez. The journey wasn't easy for any of them. The program required them to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and to understand the impact of their actions not just on Mariah but on countless others who experienced similar treatment without the power to fight back. Thomas, who had initially been the most resistant, underwent the most profound transformation. In group sessions, he spoke about growing up in a household where casual racism was the norm, about never questioning the biases he had inherited until they cost him everything. I never saw myself as prejudiced, he admitted during one particularly powerful session. I thought that because I didn't use slurs or explicitly hate anyone, I was one of the good ones. This experience has shown me how bias operates even when we don't recognize it in ourselves. Sophia's journey focused on moral courage, the willingness to speak up even when it might cost you. I knew what was happening was wrong. She shared, but I was afraid of losing my job if I challenged Thomas or the captain. Now I understand that my silence made me complicit. Captain Vasquez, the oldest of the three, perhaps had the hardest road. Decades of believing she had treated everyone fairly were called into question by her actions that day. I trusted the wrong things. She reflected, I trusted hierarchy over humanity. I'll spend the rest of my career making that right. With certificates from the program in hand, Thomas and Sophia began applying for entry-level positions at different airlines. Their applications now included their story not as an excuse, but as context for the growth they had undergone. Sophia was the first to secure a position, not as a flight attendant, but as a ground crew member at a regional carrier. The pay was less than half of what she had earned at Celestial. The hours were longer, and the work was physically demanding, but it was a second chance she had once thought impossible. Thomas followed a month later, starting in baggage handling at another airline. Captain Vasquez, given her age and experience, faced a different path. She wouldn't fly commercially again but found purpose teaching in the Second Chance program, helping others understand the consequences of the kinds of decisions she had made. 1 year to the day after the incident, Mariah Johnson stood at a podium in Celestial Airways' newly renovated headquarters. Behind her was a diverse group of executives, including Richard Harrington, who had undergone his own journey of understanding. Today, I'm pleased to announce that Equinox Technologies and Celestial Airways are moving forward with our partnership, Mariah announced to the assembled press. This $75 million investment will not only modernize Celestial's digital infrastructure, but will implement our proprietary bias detection AI throughout their customer service systems. The announcement sent Celestial's stock soaring, but that wasn't the most significant part of the day's news. More importantly, Mariah continued, Celestial has become a model for the industry in how to create a truly inclusive environment for both passengers and employees. Their transformation proves that accountability and growth can go hand in hand. Harrington stepped to the microphone next. A year ago, we failed not just Ms. Johnson, but our own stated values. He admitted publicly. Today, we're a different company because she had the courage to hold us accountable and the wisdom to show us a better path forward. As cameras flashed and reporters called out questions, Mariah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her mother's best friend who had become like family after her mother's passing. Your mom would be so proud of you today. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You created change that will help countless others. Mariah smiled, tucking the phone away as she prepared to answer questions. The journey had been difficult, but the transformation both of Celestial Airways and of the individuals involved proved that sometimes justice isn't about punishment, sometimes it's about progress. In the back of the room, watching the press conference on a small monitor, stood Thomas, Sophia, and Captain Vasquez. They weren't there as employees or even as guests. They were there as living testimonials to the power of accountability and redemption. Their journey from perpetrators to advocates was perhaps the most powerful part of the story, proof that change was possible, even for those who had once been part of the problem. As Mariah concluded her remarks, she made eye contact with each of them briefly. No words were exchanged, but the acknowledgement was clear. They were all part of a story that had transformed not just one airline, but had started a conversation that was changing an entire industry. Sometimes karma doesn't just arrive with a first-class ticket. Sometimes it brings transformation that reaches far beyond one moment of justice.